Tonight, we journey into the shadows, unraveling stories of terrifying encounters with entities from realms beyond. If you think you're brave enough, join us as we delve into accounts that defy logic and chill the soul. But beware! Each tale serves as a haunting reminder that some doors should remain closed. Title: Whispers Through the Woods. Nathan's skateboard rolled lazily to a stop at the edge of his driveway. The early evening sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the asphalt. It was a Saturday, and like most weekends, Nathan had a plan. Behind his neighborhood, an unfinished development offered a playground of scrap wood and potential. The skeletal frames of half-built houses provided more than enough material for him to build ramps and rails in his backyard. He slung his backpack over one shoulder, the contents rattling slightly. A hammer, nails, and a few extra tools he had borrowed from his dad's shed. The path to the construction site wasn't straightforward. He had to cut through a small patch of woods, cross a shallow creek, and climb a muddy embankment before reaching the open fields where the new homes were being built. It wasn't the safest route, but Nathan was used to it. The quiet of the woods was almost comforting, a brief reprieve from the hum of suburban life. That evening, however, something felt different. Nathan trudged down the dirt path leading into the woods, his skateboard tucked under one arm. The air was cooler beneath the canopy of trees, and the smell of damp earth filled his nostrils. Birds chirped intermittently, their songs echoing through the stillness. He adjusted the straps on his backpack and stepped carefully over exposed roots that crisscrossed the trail. The creek was just ahead, its faint gurgle growing louder as he approached. Nathan liked this part of the journey. The creek, with its clear water and moss-covered rocks, was a small oasis. He hopped across the stones with practiced ease, barely pausing to admire the glimmer of sunlight reflecting off the surface. As he climbed the muddy bank on the other side, he paused to catch his breath. A breeze rustled the leaves above, and for a moment, everything felt serene. Then he heard it. It started faintly, almost indistinguishable from the rustling of leaves. Nathan froze, one hand gripping the edge of a tree for balance. The sound grew clearer, words spoken in a low, rhythmic tone. It wasn't the chirping of birds or the distant hum of construction equipment. It was a man's voice. He strained to listen, his pulse quickening. The voice was coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. At first, Nathan thought it might be one of the construction workers, but something about the tone was off. The words weren't loud, but they carried an unsettling clarity, like they were meant just for him. He couldn't make out what was being said, but the cadence was oddly playful, almost like a song. Nathan took a step back, the muddy bank slipping slightly beneath his feet. He wasn't scared yet. People wandered into the woods all the time. Maybe it was a hiker or someone cutting through like he was. "Hello?" He called out, his voice cracking slightly. The response came almost immediately. "I'm gonna get you." The words were sung, soft and melodic, but they struck Nathan like a thunderclap. His stomach tightened, and a chill ran down his spine. Nathan's first instinct was to look around, but the woods were dense, the underbrush too thick to see far. He couldn't tell where the voice was coming from. It seemed to echo, bouncing off the trees and surrounding him. "I'm gonna get you." The voice repeated, this time louder, closer. Nathan's breath hitched. There were no footsteps, no crunching leaves or snapping branches. Just the voice, disembodied and relentless. Panic surged through him. He turned and slid back down the muddy bank, his sneakers squelching in the wet soil. The creek, usually shallow and easy to cross, now seemed like an obstacle. He stumbled over the rocks, his skateboard slipping from his grip and landing in the water with a splash. The voice followed him. "I'm gonna get you." Nathan didn't look back. He scrambled up the opposite bank, his legs burning with the effort. His backpack swung wildly as he ran, the tools inside clanging together with every step. By the time Nathan reached the edge of the woods, he was gasping for air. The familiar sight of his neighborhood came into view, but he didn't stop running until he was safely in his backyard. He collapsed onto the grass, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. For several minutes, he lay there, staring up at the sky. The voice still echoed in his mind, taunting and playful. He didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but he couldn't explain what had just happened. Gathering himself, Nathan sat up and looked back toward the woods. The trees stood still, their shadows stretching long in the fading light. There was no sign of anyone. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. He replayed the encounter over and over in his mind, searching for a logical explanation. Maybe it was a prank, a construction worker messing around or another kid from the neighborhood. But why hadn't he seen anyone? And how had the voice moved so quickly? Nathan decided not to tell his parents. They wouldn't understand. Instead, he confided in his best friend, Ethan, the next day. "You're sure it wasn't just your imagination?" Ethan asked, leaning against his bike. Nathan shook his head. "It was real. I heard it clear as day. Someone was out there." Ethan frowned, his skepticism evident. "All right, let's check it out. Tonight." Nathan hesitated. The thought of returning to the woods sent a shiver down his spine, but he couldn't back down now. As night fell, Nathan and Ethan set out with flashlights in hand. The woods were eerily quiet, the usual sounds of crickets and owls absent. Nathan led the way, his steps slower and more cautious than before. When they reached the creek, Nathan stopped. "This is where I heard it," he whispered. Ethan scanned the area with his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. "There's nothing here, man." "Maybe." The voice interrupted him. "I'm gonna get you." Both boys froze. The voice was louder now, more menacing. Ethan's flashlight shook in his hand as he turned to Nathan, his face pale. "Let's go," Ethan whispered. But before they could move, the voice came again, closer than ever. "I'm gonna get you." Nathan's heart was still racing when he and Ethan finally reached the safety of the streetlights on the edge of their neighborhood. The comforting hum of suburban life surrounded them. The distant bark of a dog, the faint whir of an air conditioner, but neither boy felt safe. The voice still lingered in their minds, as if it had followed them home. Nathan turned to Ethan, his breathing ragged. "You believe me now?" Ethan nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, I believe you. But what the hell was that?" Nathan didn't answer. He didn't know. The next few days were restless for Nathan. He couldn't focus in school, his mind replaying the events in the woods. Every creak of a desk, every shuffle of a classmate's feet made him jump. Ethan, too, seemed on edge. He avoided talking about what had happened, but the way he glanced nervously at the woods during their usual after-school bike rides said enough. The worst part was the silence. No one else in the neighborhood seemed to know or care about the voice. Nathan had hoped someone might mention something. Other kids, parents, anyone. But life carried on as usual. He felt like he was carrying a secret too heavy to bear. One evening, as he sat on his bed scrolling through his phone, he decided to do some research. He typed, "creepy voices in the woods" into the search bar, hoping to find some logical explanation. Most of the results were urban legends or ghost stories, things Nathan didn't believe in. But one forum post caught his attention. Unfinished developments and strange occurrences. The thread was filled with anecdotes about abandoned construction sites, vandalism, and even reports of squatters. One reply mentioned how isolated areas like those often attracted trouble. People who didn't want to be found. Nathan's stomach tightened. What if someone dangerous was hiding out in the woods? Despite his fear, Nathan couldn't shake the need to understand what had happened. He needed closure. After days of debating, he finally convinced Ethan to go back with him. "Are you insane?" Ethan snapped when Nathan brought it up after school. "We barely made it out last time." "I know," Nathan admitted. "But don't you want to know what's really out there? What if it's just some creep messing with us? We can't let him think he scared us off." Ethan hesitated, chewing on his bottom lip. "Fine. But this time we're bringing something for protection." The two boys gathered flashlights, pocket knives, and a baseball bat from Ethan's garage. They agreed to go during daylight, hoping it would make the experience less terrifying. The woods felt different during the day, less menacing, but no less unsettling. Nathan led the way, his steps slower and more deliberate than usual. Ethan followed close behind, the baseball bat gripped tightly in his hands. When they reached the creek, they paused. The water gurgled softly, the sound almost soothing. Nathan scanned the area, his eyes darting between the trees. "This is where it started," he said quietly. Ethan nodded, his jaw clenched. "Okay, so what now?" Nathan didn't have an answer. He stepped cautiously across the creek, his sneakers crunching on the gravel. The woods beyond seemed still, almost too quiet. As they moved deeper, a faint rustling sound broke the silence. Both boys froze. "Did you hear that?" Ethan whispered. Nathan nodded, his grip tightening on the flashlight. The rustling grew louder, coming from somewhere to their left. "Who's there?" Nathan called out, his voice trembling slightly. The rustling stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their breathing. Then, a low chuckle echoed through the trees. "I'm gonna get you." The voice was unmistakable. Nathan's blood ran cold as the playful tone sent chills down his spine. He turned to Ethan, whose face was as pale as a sheet. "Run," Ethan muttered. But Nathan didn't move. His legs felt like they were rooted to the ground. The voice came again, closer this time. "I'm gonna get you." The sound broke Nathan's paralysis. He grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him back toward the creek. Their footsteps pounded against the forest floor, the underbrush snagging at their legs. The voice followed, growing louder with every step. They reached the creek in record time, but the muddy bank proved as treacherous as before. Nathan slipped, landing hard on his side. Ethan grabbed his arm and hauled him up, the bat still clutched in his other hand. The voice didn't stop. "I'm gonna get you." It was everywhere, surrounding them, echoing off the trees. When they finally stumbled out of the woods and into the open, they didn't stop running until they reached Ethan's house. Slamming the door behind them, they collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. "We can't go back there," Ethan said between gasps. "Ever." Nathan didn't argue. For the first time, he felt like the mystery wasn't worth solving. But the voice wouldn't leave him alone. Even in the safety of Ethan's house, he could still hear it in his head. The next day, they decided to tell someone. Not their parents, they'd never believe them, but someone who might take them seriously. They went to Mr. Hargrove, the retired police officer who lived at the end of their street. Mr. Hargrove listened patiently as they recounted their story. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You boys shouldn't be messing around in those woods," he said finally. "A few years ago, there were some incidents. People hearing things, seeing things. We never figured out what it was. But it's best to stay away." Nathan frowned. "What kind of incidents?" Mr. Hargrove hesitated, then sighed. "There was a man. Lived out there for a while in one of the abandoned houses. He wasn't right in the head. Used to scare people off when they got too close. He disappeared a few years back." But what?" Ethan prompted. Mr. Hargrove shook his head. "Just stay out of those woods." The revelation only deepened the mystery. Who was the man? Where had he gone? And was he connected to the voice? Nathan couldn't let it go, even though every instinct told him to stay away. Over the next few days, he began to piece together a plan. If they were going to figure this out, they needed to be smarter, more prepared. They'd go back one last time, but not without backup. Nathan convinced a small group of friends to join them, promising it would just be a quick trip to prove there was nothing to be afraid of. Armed with flashlights, phones, and even a pair of walkie-talkies, they set off into the woods. What they found would haunt them all. The group of 5 boys stood at the edge of the woods, their expressions ranging from nervous to outright terrified. Nathan was trying his best to project confidence, but his hands trembled as he gripped the flashlight. Ethan, standing beside him, looked less sure. Behind them, 3 other neighborhood kids. Josh, a tall, wiry boy who always acted tough. Tyler, who was quiet but fast. And Marcus, whose curiosity often got him into trouble, huddled close together. "All right," Nathan began, trying to keep his voice steady. "We stick together. No wandering off, no trying to be a hero. We go in, take a look, and we're out. Got it. Yeah, Josh muttered, rolling his eyes. Let's just get this over with. Nathan hesitated for a moment, the memories of the voice still fresh in his mind. But he forced himself to take the first step into the woods, the others following close behind. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the forest floor, making the trees seem taller and more menacing. The group walked in silence, the crunch of leaves and twigs beneath their feet the only sound. Nathan led the way, his flashlight pointed straight ahead even though the fading daylight still provided some visibility. He could feel the tension in the group, the way their footsteps faltered every time the wind rustled the leaves. Do you even know where we're going? Josh asked, his voice tinged with irritation. Yes, Nathan snapped. Just follow me. In truth, Nathan wasn't entirely sure. He was heading back to the creek where everything had started, hoping to find some clue, something to explain the voice and the feeling of being watched. When they reached the creek, they paused. The water was low, trickling softly over the rocks. Nathan scanned the area, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. This is it, he said quietly. This is where we heard it. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Great, Josh said. Now what? Before Nathan could answer, a sharp crack echoed through the woods. Everyone froze. What was that? Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Nathan didn't reply. He turned slowly, his flashlight sweeping the trees. The beam caught something, a glint of metal, just for a second before it disappeared. Did you see that? He asked, his voice trembling. See what? Ethan asked, gripping the baseball bat tightly. Over there, Nathan said, pointing. There was something. Another crack, louder this time, cut him off. It was closer. Maybe we should go back, Tyler suggested, his voice shaking. No, Nathan said firmly, though his heart was pounding. We came here to find answers. The boys moved cautiously in the direction of the sound, their flashlights darting back and forth. The forest seemed darker now, the trees pressing in around them. After a few minutes, they stumbled upon something unexpected. A narrow, overgrown path that veered off from the creek. It was almost invisible, hidden beneath a tangle of vines and fallen branches. Think it leads somewhere? Marcus asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Only one way to find out, Nathan said, stepping onto the path. The others followed reluctantly, their unease growing with each step. The path was uneven, forcing them to move slowly. The deeper they went, the quieter the woods became, until even the sound of the creek faded away. Then they saw it. At the end of the path stood a small, dilapidated shack, almost swallowed by the surrounding trees. The wood was rotting, the windows shattered, and the door hung crookedly on its hinges. What the hell is this place? Josh asked, his bravado faltering. Nathan didn't answer. He approached the shack cautiously, his flashlight illuminating the peeling paint and broken boards. Should we go inside? Ethan asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Nathan nodded. We came this far. We need to know. The group hesitated at the threshold, the air thick with an unspoken tension. Finally, Nathan pushed the door open, the rusted hinges creaking loudly. The interior was as decrepit as the outside. The floor was littered with debris, broken furniture, empty cans, and scraps of paper. The air was heavy with the smell of mildew and decay. Nathan stepped inside, his flashlight sweeping the room. The others followed, their footsteps hesitant. Looks like no one's been here in years, Marcus said, kicking at a pile of junk. Maybe, Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. He moved toward a small table in the corner, where a stack of yellowed papers caught his attention. The papers were covered in writing, rambling, incoherent sentences scrawled in a shaky hand. Nathan picked one up, his eyes scanning the text. They're all the same, he said. Just one phrase over and over again. I'm gonna get you. The room seemed to grow colder at his words. All right, that's enough, Josh said, backing toward the door. This place is messed up. We need to leave. Before anyone could respond, a loud thud echoed from the back of the shack. The boys froze, their eyes darting toward the sound. It came again. Another thud, followed by the unmistakable creak of floorboards. Someone's here, Ethan whispered, gripping the bat tightly. Nathan's heart was pounding, but he forced himself to move. He stepped toward the back room, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Wait, Marcus hissed. But Nathan didn't stop. The back room was small and empty, save for a few scattered tools and a broken chair. Nathan shone his flashlight into every corner, but there was no sign of anyone. Then, he heard it. The voice. I'm gonna get you. It was right behind him. Nathan spun around, his flashlight catching a figure in the doorway. A man, gaunt and wild-eyed, his face obscured by a scraggly beard. Get out! The man screamed, his voice raw and desperate. Nathan stumbled backward, the flashlight slipping from his hand. The others burst into the room, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The man lunged toward them, but Ethan swung the bat, the sound of the impact reverberating through the shack. The man crumpled to the ground, clutching his side. Run! Nathan shouted, grabbing his flashlight and bolting for the door. The boys didn't stop running until they were out of the woods, their breaths ragged and their hearts pounding. What the hell was that? Josh gasped, doubling over. Nathan shook his head, his mind racing. I don't know, but he's real. The voice, it was him. Ethan looked back toward the woods, his expression grim. We need to tell someone. The cops, maybe. No, Nathan said firmly. Not yet. We need to figure out who he is first. Over the next few days, the boys pieced together the man's story. He was a former construction worker who had lost everything. His job, his home, his family. He had retreated to the woods, living in isolation and spiraling into madness. The voice, the shack, the strange occurrences, all of it traced back to him. But the man wasn't evil. He was broken, a victim of circumstances beyond his control. Nathan and the others debated what to do. In the end, they decided to report the man to the authorities, hoping he would get the help he needed. The man was taken into custody, and the woods were declared off-limits. For Nathan and his friends, the ordeal was over, but the memory of the voice lingered. Sometimes late at night, Nathan would hear it in his dreams, a faint whisper echoing through the trees. I'm gonna get you. And he would wake up, heart pounding, wondering if the woods had ever truly let him go.